Ladies and gentlemen, the next session will begin in 5 minutes. Please take your seats.
The Signal and Cyber Museum Society is on a mission to preserve the rich history and significant contributions of Americans who have and do serve at Fort Eisenhower in the Signal Regiment and the Army's Cyber Corps. Now, more than ever, we must save these stories to educate the public, train present-day soldiers, and inspire future generations. Your support is vital to preserve this 160-year-old history and prepare young Americans for service in the 21st century. Visit secureourstory.org to learn more and join us in keeping our nation's legacy. Together, we can ensure our history lives on.
Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. The session is about to begin. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. The session will be starting momentarily.
All right, so y'all know I had to start out with a kick butt video, right? Since we are digital and this is AFCEA. But first, I wanted to really thank Susan Lawrence from AFCEA for organizing, Mary Johnson for hosting, as well as Ryan for hosting as well, who happens to be my classmate. But there was a lot of themes that you probably heard this morning. I'm going to echo on a lot of things. Ryan talked about the 3 A's. I like the 3 A's. That's really cool. Leo just talked about a lot of the efforts that we have. He talked about breaking bureaucracy. At ASALT, we talk about disrupting the status quo. So thematically, you can see where we're going. AFCEA's whole theme about transform, align, and accelerate, I think is important. So this morning, I'm going to talk about transform. This afternoon, I think we're talking about align, and then tomorrow we're going to talk about acceleration. And if you listen to some of the discussions that we had this morning, you'll pick up on the themes across the board from me, with our ASALT colleagues, again tomorrow with the align and the accelerate portions as well. But one of the things that Leo hit on really, I think I want to foot stomp. Going back to when I was supporting the Army in the green suit or even as an action officer in the building, I have not seen better alignment within the Army at the enterprise for the modernization efforts and the digital transformation. What Leo talked about, the CIO G6, the CIO and the G6, alignment with our cyber, and also alignment with ASALT has been incredible. And so when you think about that, Leo and I were joking. Between him and I, we cover the landscape from a digital transformation standpoint, with the programs, with the activities that are going on under the acquisition community, as well as under the CIO from a policy perspective. Policy-wise, we could cover the gamut. So there's no coincidence that we've actually put out policy, guidance, and memorandum together to really accelerate everything that we're talking about and what we're doing. If you go to the next slide, I want to talk a little bit about that, go from the strategic all the way down to a little bit more thematic here. Strategically, everything that Leo talked about, yes, and. In the context of acquisitions, we talk about acquisition at speed and production at scale. That's for our weapons platforms, that's for our business systems, it's for our cyber capabilities, it's for electronic warfare, all of those things. And so you can see just an example, right? And some of our video covered it, but some of the examples of things that we're accelerating across the board to get capabilities, again, back to our soldiers at speed, right? The whole portions that we talked about, hey, you know, it takes a long time to get capabilities out. We are literally getting out capabilities 2 years after we get requirements from a physical hardware capability. Or in some cases, because of the new authorities that we're using pretty quickly, like the Rapid Acquisition Authority, we're able to get it, things like Coyotes in theater 3 months after we've gotten a shift and seen a shift in the threat, right? And so again, just highlighting some of those things in there. I wanted to hit on a couple things. Y'all have probably seen some of these slides or something like that looks like that, but things like TLIS BCT, right? Things like Army Ignited and IPSE, things like the cyber side of capabilities that we're actually pushing out across the board quickly for our soldiers is important. And y'all know that, but just like we talked about acquisition speed and production at scale from a hardware and a platform or weapons platforms perspective, that same analog applies on the digital spectrum. We have to think about how do we get the acquisition speed from a software, from a data, from a cyber, from an EW capability, and then more importantly, how do we continue production at scale? Y'all might have heard last week at GV Sets, we talked about thematically these type of things, but then also the PEOs talked about they were working with their vendors to get production of scale of our ground combat vehicles, for an example. I mean, I think there was a quote that talked about if the industry community can actually help production at scale, they can literally back up a truck full of money. And that applies to us on the digital side as well. So think about that analog. Everything from a hardware and platform perspective also applies from the digital side. And again, couldn't be more happy to talk to this audience because this is what we do. The modernization, but really the transformation from a digital perspective with our industry colleagues, with our cyber, with our PEOs, with our G6 and Signal community, as well as the CIO. The alignment that we have, literally, like Leo said, the other services and OSD are jelly, right? We actually embarrassed, right, with Leo, we embarrassed OSD and CIO at the DoD level because we pushed the reciprocity before they did, and then they put out a policy around that. So again, I want to go through the next slide, a couple more things at the strategic levels. I think some of y'all have talked or heard me talk about some of these guiding principles. These guiding principles, again, we don't want to go through and call them lessons learned because the conflict's still going on or the war is still going on in Ukraine, but there's a lot of lessons observed. We talk about, like, for example, extended fires. We've been working on precision weapons and guided weapons that shoot further, right? If we learned anything from Ukraine is that volume and traditional artillery still matters, right? And so from us, from an acquisition perspective, we owe it to our soldiers to be able to provide both or a combination, right? Because in some scenarios, it might be traditional volume in play. In other scenarios, it might be guided weapons and a deep sensing capability. Or in certain scenarios, it's probably a combination of those. Again, depending on the threat, we have to move and adapt. The low signature on the move, I think everyone understands that, the hide in plain sight, being able to do C2, not just from a network perspective, but a command and control for the commanders on the move. Give them the ability to actually move, not necessarily set up the old talks that we're used to, right? Because what's happened with Russia, they become big targets with large signatures. And then, you know, the cyber and EW capabilities, y'all know this extremely well here, right? Those are some of the capabilities that we really need to focus on. I think some of you have heard me talk about when I was at Fort Liberty, right? I was in the MI unit that decommissioned our last EW capabilities, the Turkeys and Tokies. I was actually the S4 that decommissioned that. Now we have a resurgence of that capability because it's atrophied. And again, this community and the industry, right, and our partners really need to help us accelerate our EW capabilities. When you look at the threat right now, all the UASs, we are sending attritable drones and we're doing a lot of things. But we're also looking at developing a layered defense capability for counter UAS. And yes, we have exquisite weapons and missiles to shoot them down, but we really need to really up our game on the non-kinetic side from an EW and a cyber perspective because of the affordability. We can't afford to shoot PAC-3s or high exquisite weapons and missiles when we could actually use non-kinetic effects in conjunction, right, with the different classes of UASs. So again, this community really is critical for that. I want to hit on a couple other things. Stabilize, simplify, and flatten. Y'all have heard us talk about how we're flattening the communications architecture, how we're simplifying the data, and how we want to drive more intuitiveness, right? So from a software and a technology perspective, we owe it to our soldiers to make things intuitive so we can train better, faster, quicker, and reduce the amount of time that we need for net training, right? And so again, from a software, from a digital transformation perspective, we can do that. And again, part of the principle should be, let's make things easier from a digital perspective for our soldiers so they require less training. Let's go hit the next slide. And then, so these are some of the other capabilities that we're currently working that hasn't hit FU, first unit of equip or first unit of issue, but things that are coming in the pipeline. You saw some videos already. Y'all probably recognize some of these. The Coyote actually is already in theater. These other capabilities are going to be pretty exquisite. But again, we need to balance the exquisite capabilities from a kinetic perspective with the non-kinetic. And again, this is the right audience to do that. So strategically, y'all have heard the messaging. This is really from an ASOL perspective, acquisition to speed, production to scale, and fielding new capabilities for our soldiers faster and better. And again, track record has shown in the past couple of years how quickly the community at large is moving. So the next slide. So what do we talk about? Y'all have seen the hashtag Army Digital Odyssey. It's really about modern software development practices as part of a larger digital transformation, right? That is what the Odyssey is about. It's a journey. We've actually moved a lot faster, right? The whole notion of Homer's Odyssey took them, 20 years to get back home, right? We don't expect it to take 20 years, but surprisingly, when you align the enterprise, the CIO, the G6, our cyber, ASALT, from a digital transformation standpoint, we're moving a lot faster than anyone to include all the services, and OST has been, again, jelly because we've been so aligned and moving so quickly. So almost like Leo did, I want to kind of recap, because last year you heard me talk about all the efforts that we're doing. I'm going to talk a little bit about, okay, where we are now, just like Leo did. Okay, so the next slide. We talked about modern software practices. We talked about MOSA. We talked about mesh. We talked about AI, cyber, digital engineering, and then again, the training portions, right? Those are thematic areas around the digital transformation you saw in the video areas that we're focused on. We're continuously pushing on it. So now next, we'll talk about how far we've gotten and where we are. Next slide. So accomplishments, right? This one is funny. We were joking last night. Oh, we should announce it like the old Ron Burgundy, as the news person delivering that. But the SBOM policy, y'all have been hearing us talk about. It was literally just signed Friday, right? So we will get guidance out there. It is part of guidance for our force. It's part of guidance from an acquisition standpoint, from also a procurement and contracting perspective. And again, we worked through that, and I think not across the board, but more than 90-odd% of the people in the industry much better aligned with SBOMs. They're not necessarily in favor of like the software attestation that federal government is really pushing, so they're much easier with SBOMs. But again, now that policy's done. If you look at that, the modern software directive, y'all have already heard about it. That was signed in March, right? The decoupling hardware and software material release process staff signed in January. The UDRA 1.0 that was published between ASALT and the CIO and the CDO back in March. The digital engineering directive, again, signed again in May, right? The Gen AI policy, you saw that Leo talked a little bit about it. Tomorrow, we'll talk a little bit more specifically about it and how we're working some of those areas. But the Gen AI policy, again, is to really encourage commanders and ACOMs working with industry to look at LLMs, right? But again, just keep in mind if things are classified or in a secret or a NIPR environment, keep those in place. But also give some more guidance on there. If you're going to use Gen AI, put the watermarks in there, right? So again, more guardrails in place so we can, again, adopt technology faster. And some of the other things that are still in process or in the process of staffing right now will be signed off shortly. The data mesh policy, the project linchpin policy, as well as the data bomb policy, right? So software bombs, data bomb will come next, and then the AI summary card policy. And why do I say that? Because, again, to kind of recap where we are, what we said last year, the progress where we're at now, right? To show you all these things that we're doing, again, so we can accelerate the digital transformation, work with industry to meet them where they are, right? And so we can enable capabilities faster for our warfighters. Next slide. So if you aren't familiar with the software directive, here's a little recap. But again, it's really to meet industry where they are, drive agile, but more importantly, DevSecOps. You heard Leo talking about reciprocity and stitching together capabilities, right? We're working with ASALT collectively with our PEOs and PMs, are working with them to really establish baselines of functionality or tools, as well as we don't want to rebuild everything. We're driving the reciprocity, right? So we can actually leverage existing pipelines, right, across the formation so we're not wasting time and effort. We have multiple pathfinders. You notice the 2 pathfinders that Leo pulled out earlier are actually within our PEO and PM community, right? There's other pathfinders that we're doing across the board to drive the software directive, collapsing the testing portions. There's pathfinders there. There's pathfinders to insist that we bring users and ForceCom units with the requirements and the development team to really meet in the middle the way that industry does that. And across the board, this, if you're not familiar with it, there's actually 12 components of that. We just categorized in those 5, so it gives you a better sense of that. But things like CATO that Leo was talking about, right? Those type of things, the RMF 2.0. We are working with our colleagues to drive pathfinders and pilots to make sure we have a process so that industry can help us faster, right? So we could drive those capabilities. Next slide. Securing the software supply chain. We talked about the SBOM earlier, but literally hot off the presses, it was literally just signed, so you will see more details. But again, it is really guidance, but also more tangible things like a playbook for our contracting community, what type of language that we want to have in there. And again, this has been a series of working with industry to get your feedback, adjust language, all of those type of things as well. The next slide talks a little bit about MOSA. Just to recap, a lot of times we talk about MOSA, and you're all familiar with the things on the right, right? FACE, CMOS, SOSA, ISA, all of those things are great. We need that, and we need to continue driving that. But that's just the hardware side. If you see what we're doing at the software layer, we're driving open APIs or industry accepted APIs. Or in areas that there aren't any, like Hydra API, we're continuously driving that to drive more interoperability, not just at the hardware layer, but also the software layer. People ask, okay, then what is the mesh and how does that play into it? The data mesh and UDRA is MOSA for data. So if you think about it from a technology perspective, it's a 3-tier architecture, N-tier, whatever you want to call it. Hardware, software, and data all comprise how we're driving openness, interoperability across all of those levels. Where we were previously mostly focused on hardware, we want to have that and drive more interoperability and openness across the whole stack, hardware, software, and data, okay? The other thing that really helped, I think we talked about decoupling software and hardware lifecycle. The memorandum we pushed out in January, decoupling the hardware material release and the software material release, again, helps us really drive that and drive adoption of technology from industry working with us. So it's not tightly coupled to a hardware material release process that literally 5 or 10 years to refresh hardware, right? So why would we want to tie the software updates that we could get real time to a 5 or 10 year release process? So that's why we decoupled it. All again to drive working with the industry to do modern software development the way that industry is doing it. Next slide. So we talked a little about simplifying the complexity for data-driven decisions. 3 Ds, woo, that's a tongue twister. All right, so next slide. Again, this is just a recap, you already know it. I'm gonna double foot stomp here. UDRA is MOSA for data, right? The mesh and the implementation of that is MOSA for data. We have been working across the board with a lot of the efforts. Y'all hear our colleagues talk about C2 Fix, C2 Next, those type of things. We're working with communities. We're working with C3T, right? We're working with the logistics community and Class 5. We're developing data products to go into the reference implementation so we can understand how they'll work and how industry and vendors can work with us. Again, UDRA is MOSA for data, okay? People are asking how it all fits together. This is how it fits together. Those of you know me know that I have lots of things going on, but in my head, they all fit together nicely. This is how it all fits, okay? Next slide. We accelerated our epic journey through our Army Digital Odyssey, right? So again, just kind of recapping a lot of those things. And I think this is the last slide. Next slide. Oh, no. Teasers. We got a couple teasers. I forgot about that. We can't lose sight of the AI. So we actually have tomorrow, specifically on the Accelerate, a discussion around AI. I'm going to tease a little bit of that. We have the hashtag Defend AI, our layered defense framework, right? We're going to talk about counter AI tomorrow. And we're going to talk about some of the things that we're working through the pilots, like the LLMs, some research that we're doing already, so we can look at attack vectors with large language models and other things, to include deep reinforcement learning as well as agents or assistants that Leo talked about. And really tee that up for the afternoon panel after the AI discussion with industry leaders around AI and what's the future of that going to look like, okay? Next slide, accelerate with precision. Digital engineering. The reason why we're doing MOSA and all these other things and systems engineering rigor across all our programs, hardware, weapon systems, digital, is because I said it, I think, to this audience too last year. Most of the industry already does things in a digital engineering construct, and we ask them to convert those digital models to a paper-based model, to send it to us, so then we can review it and then convert them back to a digital model. Doesn't make sense, so we're really driving the streamlining of that process. But then what does that allow us to do? You can read it in our directed energy, digital engineering policy of why, so they can accelerate the whole process from a digital, from a software, from all capabilities, hardware and digital, across the board, and meet industry where you are. But really, this will help us accelerate more of our acquisition and get production at scale, digital platforms as well as physical platforms, okay? And so I think that's our last slide. Next slide. Yes, it is our last slide. So again, I know it was a little fast, but that was slightly intentional to kind of talk about our journey at the macro level, acquisition at speed, production at scale, reset around the digital side of things, reset to show our accomplishments, and the way that we're breaking down obstacles at the enterprise level to meet industry where you are, right? And then really, I'm going to be followed next by a distinguished panel, right, led by Ms. Swanson and our PEOs. They're going to talk a little bit more in detail about how they're executing, a little bit more operational at the PEO level and tactical at the PM level, okay? So you can save all the hard questions for our distinguished panel coming up. Thanks.
Do I have an assigned seat, Jen?
Wherever you want. Oh, okay. Anywhere you want, Mark. I don't know. All right, good morning, everybody. So I think Mr. Bang did a bang-up job of laying out really all of the things that we're doing in the space of digital transformation. And so you guys are selected to be up here with me today because—
Were we selected? Or?
Yes,
Oh, okay.
100%. You were hand-selected, exactly. Because really, you know, I mean, I think digital transformation is very important to everybody in ASALT, right? It's not just you guys, but your spaces are particularly influenced by the things that we're doing. And so if we could just start by real quick, everybody just, who are you? And like 30 seconds on why digital transformation matters to you. And then we're gonna get into some questions.
All right, thanks. How's everybody doing today? Good? All right? A lot lack of energy. I don't know. For reasons, maybe. So I'm Mark Kitts. I'm the PEO for C3T, but really I'm the PEO for the Unified Network. And so we are going to talk a lot about the Unified Network over the next 3 days. But I think relatively obvious why digital transformation is important to me and how we build our network. You're going to hear from a lot of my team in how we get after building the unified network and some of the tenets around the unified network. So really, I'm looking forward to your questions. I'm looking forward to discussing sort of the intricacies involved and the teamwork involved in delivering that network. So appreciate it. Thanks, Jen. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here.
All right. Hey, we're going to try that one more time, Mark. Hey, good morning. There we go. Hey, Lee James, Deputy PEO down at STRI. Joined the STRI team back in April. And hey, we've had an exciting, eventful year thus far. And digital transformation, why is it important for us? We had an AROC with the chief a couple months ago, and we went in on our synthetic training environment, the software component, and what we briefed him on was our plan. We laid out our acquisition strategy and our plan, but the date there was 2026, and he told us that's not fast enough. So back to Mr. Bang's comment earlier, hey, we got to do this faster, and we got to do it at scale. So that's why digital transformation is important to us, because in order for us to meet that intent, we're going to have to transform, which is already underway, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. Thanks, man.
Thank you.
Good morning. Okay, that was how you do it. I'm Lawrence Mixon. I am actually not an acquisition person. I am an Intel plant within the acquisition community 8 years ago. I worked for Brigadier General Ed Barker, PEO, IEWNS, and the S is sensing, and it's critically important for us to be able to move sensor data at speed, faster than the enemy, to enable our commanders to make decisions. As a career Intel guy, I am super excited about what we are doing to enable intelligent support to Mission Command, targeting, sensing, EW, and cyber. So that is why digital transformation is absolutely critical and fundamental to everything we do. And you will hear from 3 of our experts. If you go to other panels, you'll hear from Colonel Chris Anderson, who's handling our Intel modernization side. You'll hear from PM Ken Strayer, who is focused on EW. And you'll hear from Christine Moulton, who is leading our integration, our sensor architecture development. Thank you.
Hi, and I'm Bill Hepworth, PEO Enterprise. I'm not going to yell at you to start. I figure you just had one coffee, so that wouldn't be fair. For those who don't know, PEO Enterprise, we literally build the platforms that the Army runs on, such as Logistics Management Program, GFEBS, and a bunch of others you're probably familiar with. And really, it's obvious why digital transformation is essential to us. It's really critical for everything we do. And the reason is because the faster we can deliver capabilities to the Army and the more affordably we can do it, that frees up more resources to build additional capabilities. So we've gone to a whole lengthy process now. We're on kind of year 2 of transformation, where we have now flipped our entire program over to Agile so we can deliver faster, earlier, cleaner, and also to build the soldier's intent in mind with everything that we do. So for us, you can see digital transformation is really not an optional thing. It's pretty much our lifeblood, and it will continue to be over the next 5 years.
All right, thank you. So before we get into questions, Mr. Bang had to compress his time so that we could get up here, because he really wanted to make sure that we could showcase the PEOs and all the great work that you guys are doing. So he went through stuff quickly, right? There's a lot of policies, a lot of directives that we have generated. I don't want it to be lost that we're not just sitting in the Pentagon writing stuff. There was a tremendous amount of work that went into each one of those, using pathfinders, changing Army processes, because at the end of the day, that's really what it's going to take. And so everything that we've done is really intended to set you guys up for success and remove the obstacles. So with that, Mark, I'll start with you. So, there's a bunch of stuff, you don't have to cover all of it, obviously, but what are some things that have helped you in terms of your day-to-day job that are coming out of all these digital transformation initiatives?
Yeah, so first of all, I think, underpinning everything that we do is a contract, is a partnership with industry. And so I think really one of the things that have really enabled what my PMs are sort of getting after is sort of this feedback and partnership with industry. And so I think one of the real critical enablers for my organization in building the unified network is how do we get after these digital transformation initiatives with how we do business, which is contracting. And so a few innovative areas that we've sort of embarked upon, and Leo talked about this a little bit with his, we want to adopt, we want to buy, or we want to create. And really what we tend to do is buy and modify, right? And how we sort of leverage commercial industry has been sort of a very, an enabler for us to get time to market very quickly, and for us to sort of build this integration environment where we can get to capability. And so I think across sort of our portfolio for fires and Mission Command, we're really leveraging a lot of these initiatives for digital transformation to allow for a more sort of a more open ecosystem where we're modifying commercial technologies to deliver solutions. And so I think between the software director, between all of the sort of initiatives at ASALT, I think that's allowing us to get to time to market much more fast. The last thing I'd say, and again, I do want to foot stomp this, is for us, digital transformation is about our partnership with industry. And that comes down to some innovative contracting. So we have PMs doing innovative contracting. In fact, we recently awarded a contract doing enterprise software delivery, enterprise capability delivery, using award fee to drive incentive behavior, right? Because we want to incentivize positive behavior in software delivery. That's not software development, that's not commercial buys, that's across our integrated software environment. And so I think while we're enabled by a lot of these policies and a lot of the digital transformation, at the end of the day, we do business through contracting and defining the role of the government, defining a way we can incentivize behavior in that contracting is not a one-size-fits-all approach. And so I think this journey of digital transformation is going to continue to evolve, and I'm very much looking forward to feedback from industry on how we do that through our contracting mechanisms. So thanks for the opportunity to go first. I will say this is the first time in my career I am overdressed for a panel. And so after 3 years of work for Mr. Bang, you think I would learn by now, but I haven't learned yet, sir. So anyway, thanks, Jen.
You're a quick study, Mark, usually.
All right, yeah.
So, yeah, and I mean, I absolutely agree with the contracting piece, and obviously everything we do is with industry. There's a lot of contracting innovation for digital coming out of the Digital Capabilities Contracting Center of Excellence at APG as well, and I think Danielle is doing a fantastic job of, number one, coming up with very creative ways to incentivize behavior, and number two, vetting all of that with industry extensively, because I think we can't sit and try to figure it out on our own. We have to make sure that what we're thinking makes sense, is executable, is feasible. And so, yeah, I totally agree with you. So, Lee, so you're new at STRI. STRI really is almost exclusively a software-based PEO. I mean, all of the training capabilities that you develop, certainly digital in nature, right? So can you talk a little bit about maybe what are you guys doing, some of your programs where you're really seeing success, challenges, whatever, like, as it ties back to the initiatives?
Yes, ma'am. Great question. And I'm going to take a slightly different twist. So software, yes. Exclusive, yes. We also have that hardware component, and that's really the need for our synthetic training environment modernization. We've got to use that software to bring together the various hardware components and training devices that are considered legacy or existing, right? So taking those agile principles and applying them not only to our software piece but to our hardware component, that's what we're challenged with. And I'll take our reconfigurable virtual collective trainer, our RVCT, for example, which is our training device or simulator that brings together the the vehicle, the aircraft, and the dismounted infantry components, right? Both individual and collective. So when you take that simulation device, we've got to develop this in a way that we can't wait 2 years, as I mentioned, to field something. So what is good enough? We can't field hardware that's almost finished, right? And as we all know, software is never finished. So how do we fuse those two, I guess, principles together and deliver value faster? So for us, it's balancing that fine line of is it good enough? Is it a minimum viable product in the hardware sense? We got the hardware piece, but in the hardware sense, is that hardware good enough to go? And for us, what that means for our users is, does it deliver value, and does it allow the soldiers to take those skill sets from a training environment and translate them, transfer them to an operational environment effectively, right? That's what we're all about. So fine line between, minimum viable product and training bad habits, right? We absolutely do not want to train bad habits and incentivize bad behavior. So that's our fine line when you talk about taking these agile principles and applying them in the hardware space. And another component I'll mention is the STE software component that we're bringing together, and we're working with CACT, our teammates at CACT up at Fort Leavenworth. When you talk about that verification and validation process, getting that hardware accredited, which is something a little different than what we do in the software world. So how are we're working with our teammates there to streamline, to integrate their verification and validation processes into our sprint-like hardware, software development. So that's our challenge. That's what we're dealing with at Stride. We've taken that approach and applied it across all of our modernization programs, which are mostly software intensive. But again, we've got those hardware components that we've got to integrate into those. So that's what we're challenged with. And hey, we've made some strides, and we expect to make some even more significant strides in the coming weeks. And we expect to start fielding some of this capability later this year.
Awesome, thank you. And you guys also, I think you should take credit for, you are ahead in terms of setting up really a DevSecOps environment for the PEO, which is awesome. I think you guys are doing great things there, as well as with UDRA implementation. You guys got ahead of that really fast. So I think you're doing a lot in that space.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. So, Mr. Mixon.
Yes, ma'am.
So, I think scale is always a challenge because the Army's big, right? So all the things that we do sometimes work at the micro level, but now when we have to expand to the macro level, it gets harder because there's things that we have to think about to make sure that that's going to work. What are some of the things in the digital space where IEW&S is looking at not just, how do we build the first piece, but also how do we scale that so that it works for everybody?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think, first and foremost, I think Honorable Bush and the Army has given us a wide range of tools, a full quiver of tools with which to do acquisition, and that's enabling us to work smarter, faster, and scale more rapidly across a number of program areas. We had an EW TTX a few months ago, and out of that, we recognized that we need to move a lot faster and deliver capability in the EW space much more quickly than we've been thinking in the past. So we've been able to leverage those tools to do that. Some of the programs that come to mind for me, S2A, Spectrum Situation Awareness System, is something that allows us to see ourselves in Spectrum, in the EMS, something that we can also allow our coalition partners to see themselves, and we can also see the threat and create a common picture so we understand who's operating within the EMS so we can survive and we can also deliver effects. Another program, MEMS, a modular EMS system, takes me back to when I was in the 9th Infantry Division, where we did have some systems that allowed us to obfuscate and to spoof and trick the enemy and threat. So we are re-embracing that type of approach, and because we are not hard coupled to hardware, we can spin and pace with the enemy through software, and I think scale more rapidly. I'll give you one other program. Again, in the EMS space, on the EW side, We have been working closely with C5ISR and the Army reprogramming team. Also, to allow us across the board, there's policy that says every EW system that the Army creates has to be reprogrammable. So we are embracing that piece and allowing ourselves to pace the threat across the whole EW portfolio by focusing on that reprogramming capability.
Yeah, and that reprogramming capability actually was in my old organization, Software Engineering Center, and they do a great job. They really do. I mean, they can pull releases in 24 hours when the threat dictates that that's needed. So that's awesome. Thank you. All right, Bill. So Bill, I think, you know, you came from industry, right, and came into the acquisition community relatively recently. You took over a PEO that certainly had some challenged programs, almost all software, especially after the reorg. That's really what's left there, right? So can you talk a little bit about what have you done to turn those programs around? Because I think you've certainly had some successes over the last year or two, and that doesn't just like magically happen. So how are you doing it?
Yeah, it was definitely not magic. It was hard work and toil. And so I think the first thing we did is really made the commitment we were going to do it. That's the hardest part. And that means no hand waving and saying we're agile and we're going to use a few agile terms and call it a day. We didn't do that. So we took a plunge about a year and a half ago, I think it was, where we finally just went ahead and said we're going to pick something under the belief that if you stand for nothing, you'll fall for anything. So we ended up kind of unifying around SAFe, Scaled Agile Framework, for those who don't know what that is. And what it started doing is giving us a common language to talk from the program level all the way down into the tech teams. It also allowed us to integrate the tech teams and the program levels to start communicating, especially with our functionals, and aligning the priorities inside of each program so that we can go after the highest value targets up front. The other thing too is we actually leveraged quite a bit of the training provided by DASA-DES. We thank you for that. To teach our entire workforce about digital transformation and the agile transformation. So beyond that, what we started doing is actually creating a group within our acquisition innovation directorate called the LACE, the Lean Agile Center of Excellence. And admittedly, if you hear Mr. Eric Sherwood, who was running that for us, he referred to it accurately as the Lean Agile Center of Mediocrity in its first couple go-arounds, because we struggled had to transform from waterfall to agile. But what we've been able to do now is really systemically go across our entire portfolio now, and at the very least enforce SAFe principles. And most of the programs now are operating under full agile, where we're doing 2-week sprints, we're doing product increment planning. We're actually working and collaborating with our functionals now, and they're joining the journey, and that is one of the big keys. Because if your functionals aren't on board, you're going to have a really tough process ahead of you. This year, we're trying to transition and go even further down the path of DevSecOps. We want to start doing automated builds, automated deployments, automated testing. That's key. It's a big push this year. And I'm happy to say that we'll have that up and operational in the next couple months, where that'll become standard across the organization. And so the other thing too is we're trying to improve the cyber posture and how we do ATOs. And a lot of that involves leveraging more of SaaS, less home-built products, no more stick-built. We're going to try to put an end to that. And so it's not one thing, it's all those things that we talked about, and the transformation continues. We're not done. We imagine that we're going to be still pushing forward for the next year and still transforming. And then just one quick note, industry plays a key role in this, right? We can't do this ourselves, and luckily our industry partners have been fantastic at supporting us and bringing their best practices, their recommendations on how to upscale our force and our development force collectively, and also how to bring some of the best practices and leading edge practices into the PEO, which has been fantastic. So hopefully that answered it.
It does, yeah, no, thank you. I mean, I know it's a process, right? It's a journey. As Mr. Bang said earlier, it doesn't happen overnight. But certainly, I think, from the leadership level, you're all setting the right tone for your organizations, and folks need reps and sets, and we need a lot of help from industry. But you know, we see change, which is very exciting. It's a great thing. So, do we have time for a question or two? Okay, great. All right, so we can take questions.
Okay, so we had one come in. How is the Army working to ease entry by non-traditional commercial vendors, especially by embracing as a service and removing DoD-specific requirements, both technical and cost accounting?
Yeah, it's a very similar question to what Leo got earlier. So we are working very closely with all different types of companies because we want all competition, right? So I just want to make sure that that's clear. We want to make sure that non-traditionals, smalls, as well as larges and others have opportunity to compete for the work. I think that's how we get the best product to the soldier. So there are a lot of things that we are looking at. Feedback from industry is critical. So I'll use one example from LinkedIn this weekend. The modern software development contract that we put out a draft RFP on Friday, somebody wrote a comment in LinkedIn that I will say inadvertently, included labor categories that have all of the education requirements and things that we've always used that don't really make any sense anymore. It's limiting and it's not what we want. And so I'm not sure who pointed that out, but thank you to industry for providing that feedback. There's a new draft RFP going out today that really is gonna, we're gonna get rid of that, but also we need help from industry. So I don't think that saying we're gonna pay X for a bachelor's in this and X plus 10 for a master's in this makes any sense anymore in this space. But what does make sense? And so that's something that we are looking for feedback from industry. We are gonna go to some of the commercial companies that hire contractors, like Apple, for example. I mean, Apple obviously has an organic workforce, but they also contract stuff out. How do they decide what they're paying for and what that right mix is? And so I think if industry has that feedback, it would be great. So I think that's a government-specific requirement, for example, that we're removing, and there's a lot of examples that way. The other piece is for contracting. I think there's been confusion with the software directive in terms of firm fixed price and what does it really mean. So when we're buying straight up commercial software, it's firm fixed price. There's no other way to buy that would make any sense. So, you know, if I'm buying a product, that is going to be a firm fixed price contract, and that allows industry to spend your money developing that product, sell us something, and you will get that back via a firm fixed price vehicle. Where firm fixed price doesn't make sense is when we are developing software, because if you look at, you know, the agile process, we don't really know exactly what we want, when we're going to want it. When, you know, what are things that are going to change along the way? Requirements are going to change. I mean, that's kind of the whole point of Agile. And so that becomes a big risk to both government and industry from a firm fixed price perspective. However, we want to make sure that non-traditionals, smalls, others without certified cost accounting systems have the opportunity to compete. So there's labor hour contracts, there's T&M contracts, there's other options that Danielle Moyer is working with industry to make sure that we're not leaving anybody out, because we want to make sure that that is, you know, competition is open for all. Anybody have anything else to add? Go ahead.
Yeah, I would say, especially going forward in the AI/ML development realm for us, Linchpin and related efforts, we're embracing the multiple award task order contract approach. So more vendors will have more opportunities through smaller task orders to have a bite at the apple, okay, and be participants in this process. And so we're looking for again, for wide umbrella folks to come in and work with us in that realm.
And I think one of the things you're seeing is a culture shift at our PEOs where we are soliciting feedback on contract type, selection criteria, and incentives before a draft RFP hits the street. And so whether it's Linchpin, whether it's a lot of our EW capability, whether it's UNO, CMFF, Like, we don't want to just come and say, hey, we're going to do a fixed price other transaction authority, and that's what it's going to be. We want feedback from industry early on contract type, and if you don't take that opportunity, shame on you. But I think the one way we counter some of this, and we're always going to be in this cultural shift of how do we get smalls incentivized, et cetera. But one thing we're going to need from you is that early feedback on contract strategy and the details behind it, rather than just commenting on a draft RFP. And so I encourage you to come to these early industry days, TEMS, you name the millions of forums that we have with industry to give us feedback on that early contract selection, because I think Jen made a great point. PMs have a lot of playbooks they can use. Let's find the right play for that specific problem rather than looking at the same play over and over.
Yep, and I'll take that one step further. Danielle Moyer is looking at how do we potentially not even define the contract type in the RFP, but really use it as source selection criteria. Because that allows industry to come in with different solutions that would be best suited for different contract types. And if your solution is the one that's chosen, then that's the contract type that we use. So we're really trying to break a lot of previous, I would say, rules that we followed in terms of how we're approaching this, and opening up the aperture so that we can cover all bases. So,
If you don't mind, and the other thing too that I'll throw out there is that we selectively are opening up options within OTAs to encourage additional participants. As a matter of fact, we've done it in one of the larger scale programs with EBSC. So we're more than willing to do that, especially when we're going into areas where we really need to validate that our vendors are bringing innovative ideas in. So you'll see some of that. And then just to foot stomp what Mark said is, again, you're in the right place already. AFCEA, anything AFCEA does is an education for you to learn what we're going after and what you can get involved in. But most importantly, reach out to us. If you're a small business or a lesser known business, non-traditional, talk to us and give us your thoughts, because that really helps us kind of get an understanding of the realm of the possible when it comes to putting out these acquisitions.
yep. All right, I think we killed it with that question. Do we have time for another one, or are we getting the hook?
I think we have time for one more question.
Okay.
Do you anticipate integrating AI into coding and DevSecOps software development?
Interesting. So we actually, Mr. Bang and I briefed the secretary not too long ago and laid out there is a difference between software and AI. And so we try not to kind of conflate those two terms. They are related, but they are different. And really, primarily, software is deterministic and AI is not. And so when you, for example, test software, you know what you're going to get. You expect an output for a given input, and it's not going to change. In AI, that's not the case, and you can test it yourself. Ask ChatGPT the same thing a few times and see if you get back the same thing. You won't. So we're trying not to conflate those two. That said, clearly they will operate in the same spaces, right? And so we are going to have capabilities that have both software and AI capabilities. We are building Project Linchpin, which we're going to talk about later. Chris and I have a thing, I don't know, today, tomorrow, I think tomorrow, to talk more about Project Linchpin, but that's really a pipeline and an environment. Mr. Bang doesn't like it when we call it just a pipeline. It's really a whole ecosystem for how are we going to vet our AI capabilities, in a very simple way to say it. Similar to a DevSecOps pipeline, right? So it's kind of similar processes, but I would say we're not necessarily going to combine the two into one thing.
And I would say a lot of the efforts around digital transformation, especially for the network, is really enabling us to get more Commander responsive, right? How do we get more responsive? Whether that's AI or software, Commander doesn't care. They're trying to solve a problem. And we're asking commanders to operate very differently today. Yeah. Human-machine integration, electronic warfare, just this week, we're conducting a long-range air assault, the 101st into JRTC for the first time in a very long time. So we're asking commanders to operate in a very different environment, and now we're enabling them with technology. We have got to be more responsive to how they're going to want to fight in the future. And so whether that's AI, whether that's software, whether that's our hardware programs, as Lee mentioned, right? We have to get more adaptable. And I think this is really the acquisition community embracing that adaptive culture. And digital transformation is just enabling us to get more responsive to some of these demands. Because we have to, right? The future fight's going to determine it. And anyway.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you. Okay, so before we close out real quick, I just want to take a moment to congratulate our newest Brigadier General in the acquisition community, that guy over there, RJ Mikish. So, and I know, RJ, you said earlier you want to put all the people that said they called it in a room, but I have the mic right now. So I just want to say I called it like 7 years ago when I first started working with RJ, and I was like, if this guy does not become a general, we are doing something wrong. And I was right, so just saying. So congrats, super, super well deserved, and I think I know you're gonna do great things. So, okay. All right, well, thank you so much for your time. We have a lot of other panels scheduled and things scheduled, so look forward to talking to you guys this week. Thank you, and thanks to you guys for joining us up here and doing great things. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. The next session in this ballroom will be a keynote from Lieutenant General John Morrison beginning at 1 o'clock. For attendees with tickets, lunch service will be from 11 to 1 in the Reynolds lobby through the back of the exhibit hall downstairs, where you'll find a buffet meal and plenty of seating. You'll also find a great deal of content in the rooms on the Riverwalk hallway, classes, tracks, and much more. Check your app for full information on all of these sessions.